So basically the topic of this session is you don't need Dynamics CRM, you need a Power App. First off, thanks to the sponsors, Microsoft, HSO, Docs 42, PwC, Proximo 3, AIS. Without these sponsors, these things just don't happen. They don't happen for free or anything like that. We got some more sponsors, the Gold's Companion, CloudThing, Experian, Incremental, DQ Global, Alltech, Tiski, hopefully I said that correctly, and Squared Up. I've put on events back home, and without sponsors, it's a lot more harder to do this. So definitely we appreciate those companies stepping up and supporting Scottish Summit. A little bit about myself. My name is Nick Doelman. I have about 20 plus years with the Power Platform, and you're probably wondering, hey, the Power Platform hasn't been around that long, but we'll get into a little bit about that. I was a Microsoft MVP from 2017 to 2021 before I was kicked out for getting my Microsoft Blue Badge. That's how it works. You graduate to be an MVP to Microsoft. So all you current MVPs, this is what's going to happen to you, happen to me, happen to Scott. So it will just come along. That's not guaranteed though, so don't quote me on that. I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer, and I'm also a competitive power lifter. I actually just found out a couple weeks ago I will be competing in my first international event, the North Americans in Panama City in August. I'm not sure if anybody's here from Panama, but if you're going to be there, check it out. And I have a quote there from a famous strongman from Iceland, John Paul Sigmarsson. He said, "There's no reason to be alive if you can't do deadlift." Fun fact, he passed away deadlifting. So anyways, there's my contact info. Definitely reach out if you have questions later or anything like that. I'd be more than happy to follow up on that. All right. I work for Microsoft. My boss said I have to say this. I'm a full-time employee, but especially on a topic like this, my ideas, views, opinions, they're my own, based on my field experience working with various projects and stuff like that. Translation is, don't get me in trouble. I would hate to get this email saying, well, apparently at Scottish Summit, somebody from Microsoft said this, and there's this big deal that was going to close and blah, 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 all that. Like, okay, just so we're all aware. All right, now let's get into the meat and potatoes of this session. Come on in. Don't be shy. We're going to talk about the amazing origin story of the Power Platform. So yes, we are going to be talking about building a CRM and a Power on the Power Platform, but I do want to give you some background of the reasons why some of these things are the way they are and why we would do this. We're also going to talk about how to build or how to help a business or a company choose, build, or steal a business app. And then we're also going to quickly run through, and maybe some of you know how to do this, maybe some of you are brand new to the Power Platform, very quickly how we're going to build our own CRM Power App. And we're going to do it all in this session, and I'm going to talk a lot about other things, just so you can see how quick it is to actually get some of these apps up and running. Click. Oh no. Okay. So I'm going to have to go old school and do it this way. So first off, I'm going to talk about the amazing origin story of the Power Platform. Probably a lot of you think, oh, Power Platform was something Microsoft made in like 2016, 2017, thereabouts, and kind of ran with it. Well, no, there's a lot more to that story, and let's just go through that. So I'm going to go back to 2001, 2002, early 2003, and this is how I got started in the Power Platform. A product called Microsoft Business Solutions Customer Relationship Management version 1. And there was a lot of other CRMs out in the market. There was Siebel, there was things like Goldmine, SalesLogix, a few others. But Microsoft said, hey, we're going to have our own CRM system. There was another acquisition that they got another company that kind of had some of that tech. And with version 1, there was like a sales and service module. Version 3 had a marketing module. What was innovative at the time, today these are things we just take for granted, but it was browser-based. Most of the time you actually had workstation software. You would go around and install this on each individual workstation. From an architecture point of view, it had this business application layer. So there was this sort of intermediate layer in between your web browser and the back end, which was Microsoft SQL. So some of this architecture is kind of innovative to the point where you could you didn't have to be a coder or developer, but you could start doing things like adding fields to a form, adding maybe a little bit of logic with some workflows, things like that. So it was really kind of an innovative approach. And just for fun, I'll hand this around, historical piece. This is my version of CRM 1.2. So if you want to take a look at some of the marketing material that's in there, just for historic sake, just pass it around, and it's might be worth money someday, I don't know. So moving on to chapter 2, and at the time, one thing I do want to mention, CRM was an on-premise thing. You would install it on your own servers. Around 2007, 2008, this thing called CRM Live came to be, and this was cloud software. This was pretty much a full version of Dynamics CRM version 4 that was completely cloud-based. So you didn't need your own servers anymore. You paid for it on a subscription. You paid for it month by month. You just got your credit card out, bought so many users, and that was really cool because you didn't have to deal with the servers. I remember going into projects where a lot of the budget would have been on server setup, infrastructure setup, and all this type of thing. This way, we could just say, hey, you could just try it out for 30 days, and if you like it, great. If you don't, then you just don't renew the subscription anymore. Being in Canada, CRM was not the data centers were all US based at the time. Canada, there's a lot of organizations that were still very much data residency. We want to make sure data's in Canada. So I worked with a hosting provider, and we kind of had our own version of CRM. It was all licensed through, I forget the name of the licensing term, but anyways, it was interesting. So I went to a lot of projects, a lot of smaller companies, and they were still very much, we want our own servers. We don't trust the cloud yet. This is still kind of new. It's kind of scary. I said, fair enough. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to implement CRM. We'll do this on the hosting provider. If you like it, great. Then we could always offload it and bring it onto your own server, so you can make that investment later. Of all these projects that I did following that model, how many do you think actually bought servers later and migrated on-premise? Any guesses? 0. They all just think this is working great. Why would we bring it on-prem? Another interesting thing happened in my journey, and I think this happened for a lot of other people's journey as well, is they started to realize very early on, especially with CRM version 3, you could create your own entities, now called tables. You create your own forms, your views, and you could create them representing anything like events, donations, households, cars. And so what happened was this CRM provided the ability to do those data entity relationships. It was a system that was multi-user. It was web-based. You had your security and authentication built right in. You had that user interface that you'll look at a little bit later, how easy it was to put together. There was some automation with workflow. Of course, you could bring in your developers to do some, in version 3, they were called callouts, and in version 4, they were called plugins. There was reporting. Version 1 had crystal reports built in. Version 3 started using SSRS. You could integrate to other systems, like definitely on the SQL backend or through that business layer, through those APIs, the SDK. And there was even a mobile version that kind of came out as well as part of this. So if you were building a custom app, if you had to build this all from scratch in Visual Studio or even from Access, this would take, it's doable, but it would take a lot of extra work, where we were actually discovering we could build these apps directly on CRM. They didn't even need sales or service or some of those out-of-the-box modules. We could build our own custom apps. So what happened was this concept of XRM became a thing. And the idea here is, there's a video, and you can still get it, where Microsoft sort of said, hey, CRM, you can do customer relationship management. But not only that, you can do stuff like cow management, cloud management, asset management, franchise, employee. And the whole concept there, and there's that link to that YouTube video, so definitely check it out. It's kind of funky. But the idea that this was XRM, so the whole CRM system was one platform, many applications, infinite possibilities. And so we just kind of went from a pure CRM system to something that could be accessible to anybody. And it was really cool because you didn't, like, yes, we had developers doing some of those edge case scenarios, but still, an average people could start building forms and lists and views and adding fields to tables and start building business applications without needing to be a hardcore developer. One example is, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, my wife, when we got married in 2003, she built an Access database of our wedding and all this stuff, and who was invited, invitations, even at a dashboard, like who we responded to, the whole bit. And then I was talking about CRM, and she said, well, what you do sounds really cool. And I said, what I do is pretty much what you did in Access, but I'm using CRM to do that. So a few years later, she got into it. She has a degree in tourism and hotel management, and she now today is a Dynamics 365 Power Platform consultant working for BDO in Canada, and just building a lot of really neat stuff with no developer background. So we're moving on through the history here. So we had Dynamics CRM. And now that I work for Microsoft, I can't say anything negative about Microsoft, but so we love to rename things. And it sometimes works out fairly well. So we went from Dynamics CRM to Dynamics 365, and it's like, fair enough, on this platform, we're not always building CRM systems, and being in the cloud 365 days a year. I guess on leap year, we are given a pass for one day that the system might be down, fair enough. But Microsoft kind of like they like to group things together, so they brought in things like Navision and Business Central. They called that Dynamics 365. They brought in Exapta. They called that Dynamics 365. So it kind of got a little bit confusing because I was doing sessions on Dynamics 365. Once I used to do a session migrating from on-prem to the cloud, and I had some folks, very much like you, sit in the front row going, great, you're going to tell us how we're going to migrate our Exapta up into the cloud. And I'm going, sorry, I don't even know how to spell Exapta, so this is all about CRM. And they're like, oh, but your session said Dynamics 365. So these are sort of some of these naming conventions that kind of is designed to keep folks like you on your toes and keep on top of things, keep you coming back to docs and reading the information. See, that's me being positive, right? All right, so all this is going on. Microsoft is developing Dynamics 365 and evolving CRM and building a lot of these XRM tools. Now, meanwhile, at Microsoft, and this is, I don't know exactly how this happened. This is long before I joined Microsoft, but this is how I think it happened. On the other side of campus, there's a completely different team building these things, these low-code, no-code tools and data analytics tools. And from that evolved Power BI, something called Microsoft Flow, and what was the original Power Apps. And they were cooking along, and these are really cool tools. The whole idea, yeah, we're going to, citizen developers, anybody can start making apps and all this stuff. Well, what happened was, and it was great. So with these platforms, you had things like data entity and relationships, multi-user, web-based, security authentication, all of these great things. And they're like, rah, 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 we can build these apps. Look at all this cool stuff. You don't need to be a developer. See where I'm going with this? This seems a bit of deja vu going on here, right? And again, I wasn't there. Don't know how it happened. I'm just sort of like making things up here, but I think what probably happened, there was a big meeting when they were kind of promoting Power Apps, and then the Dynamics 365 folks were going, all that stuff you're talking about? We already have it. It's been like, we've had it for like 10 years already. So why are you reinventing the wheel? Why are you doing that? So I'm sure there was a few marketing people that started sweating a little bit, and a few people in the leadership team that are kind of like, holy cow, like we should talk to each other and things like that. But instead of sort of freaking out and killing off one side versus the other, there was sort of I like to call it could have been this big battle, this big wrestling match. Who was going to win? Was it going to be the new, Power Apps, Flow, Power BI? Was it going to be Dynamics 365? Well, that doesn't make sense. We shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Let's merge it together. Let's have this Power Platform, because there's great features from both sides. Working together, we can build some really cool stuff. From Dynamics CRM, which eventually became Dataverse. So for those of you who think Dataverse is a new thing, Dataverse came from something called the Common Data Service. The Common Data Service, effectively, as we know it, was the Dynamics CRM database. So yes, there's evolutions and things like that there, but this was something, there was a CDS version 1, which was a little sketchy, but the CDS that we know today, coming from that back end, is really powerful. So from that, that's why we have the two types of Power Apps, model-driven Power Apps, which are effectively the CRM forms, views, and dashboards, that kind of thing, where you could quickly build apps. They might not be the most prettiest things in the world, but they work, they're functional, people can understand them and begin to work with data. And of course, there was the Office 365 integration, Dynamics CRM already integrated with Exchange, Outlook, SharePoint for document storage and things like that. Portals, which come to my session at 4, we'll talk about portals, now known as Power Pages. And there was other things that Dynamics CRM had too, the horizontal applications for sales, finance, manufacturing, kind of pre-built out of the box, ready to be configured for businesses. But from the flip side, the Power App side, pixel-perfect mobile-ready user interfaces. If I look back in time and look at some of the projects that I worked on in the late 2000s and early 2010s, I could have solved so many problems with Canvas apps. It kind of blows my mind a little bit. Also using Power Automate. And don't get me wrong, I like the Dynamics CRM classic workflows, but once you sort of get into that Power Automate, that flow, that's like my new drug of choice in terms of automation. Now, I wish Flow would do synchronous stuff, but that's why we still have to go to workflows, but still, Power Automate was pretty cool. And then you had thousands of connectors. How many people have worked on projects in the past where you had to integrate with other systems and had to have developers write custom APIs or write custom integrations, where now we have, I think, are we up to 500 connectors yet? Do we know? I think we're close. So we have all these other connectors that we can connect. And then, of course, Power BI, we have like a much more richer reporting, dashboards, and those types of things. So as opposed to having these two streams, let's merge them all together, and we're going to, form the Power Platform. And basically, this is how the Power Platform looks today. We have 5 pillars. It's 5 as of 2 weeks ago. It was 4 before that. We have Power BI, Power Automate, Power Apps, Power Virtual Agents, Power Pages. We've got other stuff mixed in there. There's the connectors, Power Effects, which is a pretty cool new low-code language. We have, of course, Dataverse as sort of the data store and AI builder. And there's always new stuff coming in. These are always evolving, and they also like to change the icons. So, of course, every time I go to update this slide, I'm like, I have to change the icons again. But it's all good. We like change. Keeps us on our toes. All right, so I'm going to shift now. So there's a bit of a history. So sometimes, when people ask the question, why do we have model-driven apps? Why do we have Canvas apps? Well, now you understand a little bit of the history of where some of these things came from. And then if you look sometimes in Dataverse, you see some weirdness in Dataverse. Well, why? Why is it like this? Well, it's because there's 20 years of history and code behind that. So that's why we have strange things like activity pointer tables and why the attachments is a little strange and stuff like that. But it's always evolving. So I'm going to talk now about building business apps, which I know some of you are here, some of you are maybe brand new to the industry or maybe new to the Power Platform. And this is also a bit of a true story that's involved with this and sort of how the basis of this presentation came to be honest. So I worked on a project before I joined Microsoft where we were using the Power Platform. They bought Power Apps application or user licenses. We were building Power Apps, very specific kind of things around like projects and seeing kind of measuring drugs. It's a government what do you call them? Like not a government agency, but sort of a government funded type thing. Anyways, they had built a lot of old legacy apps that needed to be updated. So we talked about the Power Platform. They're building Power Apps. They were excited. They're like, this is great. They're building Canvas apps. They're using some Power Automate. They were actually updating a lot of their legacy information, making a lot more efficiencies there, and actually replacing some paper-based processes they had. They're actually using data flows to move data in from other systems into Dataverse so they can kind of work with that. They were pretty excited. Then we had a much broader meeting with more people, stakeholders, to kind of show off what was being built. And one person, she kind of said, hey, you know what you're building is really cool, this is really cool, but by the way, I'm on a completely separate committee. I wasn't aware of this. A lot of other people in this meeting were not aware of this. She said, we're looking at evaluating CRM systems. And the front runner currently is something called Salesforce. I don't know if you ever heard of it. She said, that's what we're kind of looking at as a CRM system. So can the Power Platform, it's integrating some of these other systems moving data in, can we integrate with Salesforce? And I kind of like, okay, this is a really weird question. Oops, that was, and I said, sure. Why? And the conversation sort of went this. She said, I'm on a committee. We're going to select a new CRM system. Okay? So I'm saying, did you know that the Power Platform is actually based on something called Dynamics CRM? And the kind of conversation's like, really? So how can we add Dynamics CRM to the Power Platform? So this is how the conversation evolved from that. So first off, they're pretty excited to hear that they didn't have to actually go and license a completely separate software, that they actually had a lot of the infrastructure there and the license is already in place. So she said, oh, can we add Dynamics CRM to our Power Platform? I said, yeah, and we'll go, and it's a little, we have to do a bit of a migration, but we can spin this up. But I said, but before I went in, I said, do you need to manage sales? And like I said, this is more of a project-based, government-funded organization, so they don't do sales in a traditional sense. She's like, no? Okay. Do you do support cases, service level agreements, anything from a customer service point of advantage? Not, and she said, no, not really. Not in that sense of ticketing and that kind of thing. I'm like, okay. She said, really, what we need is a centralized system of our contacts, our partners, and as well as what projects they're currently working with. And we're already tracking those projects in the Power Platform. So I was like, guess what? You don't need Dynamics CRM. You already have your Power Apps. You need a Power App. And it's running on Dataverse, and you have those licenses already. So really, that was sort of an interesting conversation that kind of moved from an organization investing a ton of money into a completely separate CRM system when they already had it in the Power Platform. And again, it just sort of goes to show sometimes, I would say the muggle, I like to use the term muggles of the world. I know we all read the docs and we see the new, I'm sure everybody here reads the release plans when they come out, but there's a larger population that doesn't. I use QuickBooks for my own personal business. Well, QuickBooks sends me 10 emails a week on all the new stuff. I ignore all of it. I just want QuickBooks to do my books, and that's it. So Dynamics Power Platform for some of our customers is the same thing. It's a tool that they use, so they don't always know how these things connect. And that's sort of our job as either consultants or developers or internal business analysts to kind of piece these things all together. So of course, this organization, they've had Canvas apps. They started building model-driven apps. They're actually starting to use portals a little bit now. And of course, Power Automate to automate some of these things. So this is a prime example of the Power Platform beginning to enable businesses. And I know we've all heard these stories before, but also from a sense of hey, we needed some other systems, and the Power Platform be able to accommodate that without the need to buy additional software. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how businesses choose business apps. I'm going to take another little stream here, and some of you probably have run into this before, and as you sort of engage with other customers. Typically, you buy something, you might build something, or you use what's available. There's another thing out there, it's called Microsoft Excel. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's very popular for people to use as mission-critical business systems, which is kind of scary. So buying something, very popular. If you're doing something like standard practices like accounting or ERP systems, this is where you want to buy something because they follow generally accepted accounting principles. I think most countries have sort of that set of standards. Sometimes you'll see some other industry verticals like learning management systems, membership management systems. The drawback of some of these systems is they don't always align to particular businesses. People, when implementation, they'll change their processes to fit the software. And I don't think that serves the business well. Sometimes to run a business properly, you define these processes for your business. Your software should accommodate that, not the opposite. You shouldn't have to accommodate for the software. And there might be some situations where that might happen, but that is sort of, the pros and cons of buying something versus using something else. The other thing, and I'm sure you've run into this, is build something. And this is where you get the developers. We're going to go from ground up. We're going to get Visual Studio or Ruby on Rails or whatever product or development platform, and we're going to build something from completely ground up, and we're going to match our business processes exactly. And this sometimes is great. A developer will build the system in whatever platform, and it'll match the business. It'll go like pixel perfect, exactly how they want it to run. But it gets a little bit harder when businesses change. And they don't just change on kind of every few years. It's every few months, every few weeks, sometimes daily, something changes in your business processes, and you have to accommodate the change of software. Think of like if there's new tax rates. Think of something like if a pandemic happens, if that ever happens, you got to change your business. People are now working from home. You have to adjust the software. This becomes expensive. And then there's also upgrade issues and other things like integrations. How do we do this? There's source code. Who owns this? How many people have heard the horror stories of you go into a customer, they have this customized system, and they're like, well, we can't make any changes because we have no idea where the developer is, and we have no idea where the source code is. Or if we've asked our old partner for the source code, and apparently we don't even own the source code. So this really becomes, kind of a problematic, and it also comes down to who owns that system. And that's not to say that we don't run into some of those same issues like with the Power Platform, which we'll get to, but again, these are some of these things that could be considered as we're going through choosing a business system. And then there's that whole use something familiar, something like Excel. And what's great about it is I can just go to my laptop, I fire up Excel, I start typing in my members, or I start typing in all my assets in my warehouse and that kind of thing. And it works. It's fast. It's familiar. Pretty much everybody knows how to use Excel. Or very quickly, I'm sure I could actually train my mom how to use Excel. She's almost 90, but it's not hard. You just start going in, you start filling in these cells, and you start tracking information. But it gets to be not really efficient because you start building multiple worksheets and trying to do things like that. Security always gets to be a little bit of an issue as well. Once you have multiple people looking at that spreadsheet, people accidentally deleting something. How does it scale? If you start getting millions upon millions of records, and then sometimes there's compliance issues because you have different people accessing this and that kind of thing. So things to watch out for. So let's talk some scary stories. This is a true story. There was an organization that I was doing some work for. They were using Dynamics CRM. They're using it to manage a lot of their projects and stuff, but they had different pockets of groups doing few cowboy things. They were managing a grants application system using Excel. So they were getting government money that they had to redistribute for grants for a workplace subsidy. They were managing it in Excel. One day, someone was working on that spreadsheet that kept all that information, and they accidentally did save as, or actually no, they did save as on a completely different worksheet. And they actually chose that Excel sheet that contained all that data, and they hit OK and overwrote that Excel sheet. So, and then a few days later it was discovered that, okay, all this data is gone, and then there was also this panic on backup, and suffice it to say they had an on-prem system and file backups were kind of sketchy, and they effectively lost about 3 or 4 months of data, which was pretty devastating. And I'm sure we all have sort of horror stories like that as well. Another horror story that I've heard too, system built in Access, and don't get me wrong, I love Access, like in late 90s, early 2000s to build apps. Access kind of was that precursor to some of these low-code applications, but that Access system was run on a desktop computer, and it was actually for a church. And they were using it to manage their memberships and the donations and things like that. And Their backups were on these things. Anybody know what these things are? These are not 3D printed models of the save button. Back in the old days, when I was like a younger man, we used to save our data on this stuff. So this is what's sort of happening, and then of course, disaster struck. And so again, this information was lost because they were backing it up on a floppy disk, but of course that was just sort of kept in the same spot. So there's all sorts of stories like this, and this is why I'm a big fan of the cloud. Like, you know, data centers go down sometimes, but at the end of the day, Microsoft probably has a bazillion backups and redundancies and, you know, geolocation and things like that. So, solution, I like to say Power Platform. Again, I work for Microsoft, so I have to say that, but effectively, these whole low-code, no-code platforms is cloud-based is kind of the way to go. We have all of these things that I talked about earlier. With the Power Platform, you have the data entity relationships tables now. I should fix that. Multi-user, web-based, with this user security, user interface, like all of this cool stuff that as a developer you don't need to worry about because it's already there. You don't have to worry about an automation system. You don't have to worry about building some of this user interface. Or no, the user security and authentication stuff, it's already there. So the question comes, who can build Power Apps? Do we need to hire specialists like ourselves? Well, definitely a help, but at the end of the day, anybody with some set of skills can become a Power Apps, Power Platform developer. And I'm sure there's some of you in this room that have had no formal education in IT. You might have come from other areas within your organization and started building apps and then maybe moved on to consulting, developing, or maybe you're still doing this now. So it's kind of one of this very approachable, very good entry-level ways to get into the Power Platform and start building Power Apps. So I did promise we were going to have a little bit of demo. We're going to build a CRM app. Some of you, I'm sure some of you could go down and run this demo for me. Some of you are maybe new to the Power Platform and maybe you've never seen this before. Are you going to do the demo? Oh, sorry, you're just going to do this. Okay. It's like, oh, well, someone took me up on this. This is great. Cool. I don't know if you found that interesting. It's sort of something I keep cleaning out my shelf every so often. Should I toss this? And like, no, this has historical significance now. All right, so let's, I'm going to get out of PowerPoint and let's pop over to Power Platform. And can I still function without my glasses? That's the question every time I start doing stuff. So I'm in the make.powerapps.com. If you're new to the Power Platform, you can actually get a developer account where you can actually play around and build this stuff, and that the developer accounts don't expire. Or you can always spin up a trial as well. That gives you 30 days that you can extend to 60 days. But hopefully all of you have access to a Power Platform environment. First thing I'm going to do is talk about Dataverse. Dataverse is cool. I didn't really talk much about this before, but one of the cool things about Dataverse is, if you don't know this, is if you were to use something like SQL Server and you install it and you create a new database, it's effectively blank. There's nothing there. With Dataverse, Dataverse already has what we call the common data model. They already have some pre-built tables that sort of reflect a lot of business applications. Of course, a lot of this came from CRM, so something like accounts and contacts and activities. These types of things are already existing in Dataverse with, if you're building model-driven apps, which we will be doing, things like forms and views already sort of pre-configured. So already, a lot of that work is done for us as we go in and start building an app. Another thing I do, not everybody does this. You should do, if you don't do this, start doing this. If you're new to the Power Platform, let me tell you now, you should always do stuff in a solution. Solutions allow you to transport this from your dev, your test, your sandbox environments to your production environments, which also, don't build this on a production environment. You can actually spin up other, like I said, developer Dataverse environments, or set up trials or do different things. You can set up multiple environments in your tenant. Make sure you do your work in a sandbox or development type area. And for some of you, you're kind of like, yeah, we know, but others who are new may not know this yet. So this is why I sort of mentioned that. Create a new solution. I'm going to call this CRM version 2022. Or actually, no, 2022. Name, select a publisher. Did I set one up already? I'm going to create a new publisher as well, just so we kind of identify who did it, and the prefix. If we don't do that, we could still do this without the publisher, but then everything would be CR something something underscore. And we would create a new version number and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to pick my publisher now that I've created it. And let's just create that. So now we're creating the solution. All the solution really is a bucket to transport stuff with. So I've created that. So right now we have no assets in our solution. That's fine. But what we want to do is we want to create an app. So here's the apps. We don't have anything there. Let's create a new app. Create an app. Now I can create different apps here, Canvas app, model-driven app. This is where some of the Microsoft naming is going to get a little confusing. We can create a page that's sort of, the model-driven and the Canvas apps are converging a little bit. We talk about Power Pages, that's a different thing. Again, this Microsoft likes to reuse, recycle some namings to keep things on our toes. Anyways, we're going to choose a model-driven app. What's cool about model-driven apps for Power Apps is a lot of that user interface is already predefined for us. We don't need to actually worry about things. Now, the thing is about a model-driven app, once you've seen one, you've seen them all. If you've seen Dynamics CRM, or eventually now Dynamics 365 and customer engagement apps, they're also model-driven apps. So from a user training perspective, once they know how to navigate one of these apps, they can kind of figure it out for all the other apps. I'm just going to call this CRM 22. If I had more time, I'd put a description. So I'm sure all of you kind of skip over, that are building apps, probably skip over these description and these little documentation fields. I try to fill in something here, not so much for someone else, but more for my future self. It's like 6 months down the road, I'm kind of like, what was I thinking here? What was I doing here? It was sort of like, so that's why it's always kind of good to fill in some of these descriptions. But this is a demo, so I'm not going to. And what I'm basically doing now is I'm basically creating that foundation for my model-driven app. And the reason why we have some of these cycling delays and things is because for this particular demo, I didn't want to get too far ahead of myself, so I slowed it down specifically so everyone can keep up. So now that we're in our app, we can start kind of beginning to add things. So I'm going to we could either like add a page, do a few other things. I think I'm going to change the resolution just a little bit. I'm going to add a page. When we're building model-driven apps, we can start with our classic table of base view and form. Now, these kind of apps sound kind of boring, and they kind of are, but they are very functional. I could also have done a dashboard or done a custom thing. The custom thing is when we start to be into merge in the Canvas apps and do some more advanced stuff. That's a topic for another day. So I'm going to stick with that table of base view and form. And remember I said earlier about the Dataverse coming with a common data model. We could begin to pick some of these tables that already exist. In a typical CRM system, we have things like accounts and contacts and activities. So I'm going to choose account, activity, and contact, which I'm going to scroll down. Pick that, add that. And now we see on the side, we have these things in our app. And that is pretty much about it that I really need to worry about now. So I can actually save the app. And now I can go in and clean this up a bit and rename some of those groupings and areas and topics. But if you're in a situation where you're working with a customer that they're considering to spend a ton of money on another CRM system, and you can quickly show them something like this within a matter of, how long did that take me? 10 minutes maybe? Oh, I got to publish this as well. Publish. Again, keeping it slow so everybody can keep up. That little spinny thing. Reflect. What are we working on? What's our next step? All right. We've now published. It's doing some preview here so you can kind of see what you got going on. And I'm just going to play my app now. No, I do not want to switch. I want to stay this profile. I'm going to sign in. Authentication. How many people saw me develop an authentication system when I'm building this app? I didn't need to do it. It was already there. I'm going to sign in. User interface. I didn't spend any time on user interface. I now have a list of my data. I have the different things here. I have the accounts, the activities. Now, to be fair, when I provisioned this, I did provision it with sample data, so that's why we're seeing some records here. But I can just go into any of these records, and there's my account information. It's using the form that was supplied out of the box. I have things like phone calls there. But effectively, I just built a CRM system in under 10 minutes with the existing pieces of the Power Platform. Now, of course, don't start sending out contracts saying you're going to build a CRM system in an hour and only charge them an hour's worth of time. You know, there's a lot of other planning and things like that too, but the whole idea here is something like this to develop from the ground up, like 20 years ago, would have taken like weeks, if not months of development time to build this with the authentication, with the security, with the different reporting and dashboards and things like that. So this is one of these cool things about the Power Platform that I really like, especially in the model-driven apps, is you can build systems, and especially if someone's expecting like a CRM system or something like that. So for this customers in particular, they had pretty much exactly what they wanted already, and they didn't even know it. Now, to be fair, that being said though, there might be times where Dynamics 365 definitely makes sense. So I'm going to go back to PowerPoint. That's my afternoon's PowerPoint, so come check that out. So we just built an app, and it was all dependent on time of how much, but basically accounts, contacts, activities, donations. If I had more time, I would have added another donation table. I would have added some fields, things like that. And again, that could have been very easy. We could also add the forms and the views and then add those to the app, and away we go. But what we could do is once we sort of show this to our customer, we could go back and add this later very easily. It's all iterative. Or we could actually, or I don't even have to do it, get someone else to do it, because again, we're kind of following the standard practices. So that whole concept of that developer that moves off to the backwoods of Alaska and we have no idea how to modify the system, this is widely known, this is widely documented how to do this. Of course, we have other things. We could export that data to Excel if someone wanted to get it into an Excel spreadsheet, and that's fair. We could even use something like Power Automate directly within our app as part of the Dataverse solution to do an email alert to finance every time there's a donation over a certain amount or that kind of thing. There's a lot more you could do with that, like generate PDFs, send out emails, a lot of automation there with the Power Automate. But sometimes maybe you do need Dynamics 365, and again, this is part of why I wanted to make sure that disclaimer was there, because I would hate for word to get back to my boss saying, well, someone from Microsoft said we didn't need to buy Dynamics 365 ever again. That's not true. Again, if you're into sales, marketing, you have customer service, you have finance, operations, commerce, human resources, insights, Microsoft has a lot of great tools, so you don't have to spend time configuring a whole bunch of stuff from the ground up. What's cool about it is it's still built in the Power Platform, so you can make those adjustments to fit the business. I was always a big fan of fitting the software to fit the business, not change the business to fit the software. And that's why working over the years with Dynamics 365 and more of these traditional projects, it was always good because a lot of those tools were there. And we could focus on those things which make the end users happy, which makes their lives easier. Not only that, Microsoft already also has a set of industry solutions. So just sort of be aware of those. I think some of these have changed, might have dropped off or added on depending, but I know, for instance, I did a bit of work about a year ago on the healthcare cloud, which is using a lot of the same technology. So there are some other apps, templates out there. So if you have a specific industry, you don't, again, have to build from ground up, and you can start going through, and they have other aspects, so you can pick and choose the pieces that you want and configure that. The other thing if you're using Microsoft Teams, maybe, I'm sure most people know this by now, but you could build Power Apps within Teams. It will actually have a smaller version of Dataverse in terms of size. You can't, at this time, and maybe someone correct me if I'm wrong, you cannot do the model-driven apps within Teams, but you can do Canvas apps with Teams. Canvas apps are great. You have to do a little bit more work that's involved in terms of sizing out everything, but still, you can do this in Teams, and it's included as part of the Teams license. So again, you don't have to necessarily do additional licensing, and if you get to the point, you can upgrade this and migrate this out. So I would sort of, for those of you who are building apps, keep going. For those of you new to the Power Platform or considering this as a career choice, start building apps. Like, you know, start building apps to keep track of your comic book collection or something like that, just to get practice and sort of get those skills built, and you can apply those to businesses. I can tell you, and most of you know, probably for those of you who might be independent consultants or have worked for other companies, I think we all have pretty good careers. I don't want to speak too much out of turn, but I think financially, I think we probably do pretty well in this industry, and there's still tons of opportunity out there. So if you're new, just graduating, I highly recommend, this is pretty good. Even if you're graduating, if you're not so big on college or university, you go to high school and you get some skills, you could go down this. Now again, don't go back to your parents, because I don't want to hear from my boss, and I don't want to hear from them either. But this is pretty cool stuff. This has been my career for 20 years. I absolutely love it, and still continue to love it moving forward. So that kind of sums up everything. I know this presentation was probably a little bit different than maybe what some of you were expecting. I hope that's okay. Again, thanks to the sponsors for making this happen. I'm around here. Actually, is there any other? We have time. We have about 4 minutes for questions. Yeah.
So, it just might be me, but one of the previous slides you showed that sort of whether you choose Dynamics 365 or Power Apps. Mm-hmm. You said sometimes you would choose Dynamics 365, and one of the points was sales. But my question, you said then you could add the functionality of Power Apps or Power Platform to that. So could you give me an example if I was to use Dynamics 365 sales module, what kind of functionality could I add to that with Power Apps?
Oh, you mean like what? Sorry, what it? So the question is, what functionality could you add to existing sales, for example? So think about, so the sales module has things like leads and opportunities, and there is a bit of like you do quotes and things like that. But let's say you have a very, let's say you're doing work for an organization that has a very unique procurement process that needs to go through approvals or that kind of thing. There is some of that functionality, but maybe you want to have to integrate to another order entry system and that kind of thing. These are types of things where you would extend sales. You could extend sales into that. Maybe the reporting is a little bit differently. You report on different timings, or if you put in an opportunity and you want to do forecasting, as opposed to just a lump sum, you want to actually do an opportunity on a subscription. So you can start doing some other customization that your opportunity is now broken down into like one for the next 12 months kind of thing. And do forecasting that way and kind of break out that opportunity entity out of the box and make that extended. Or you can just add other fields and that kind of thing, or add other approvals and that kind of stuff. Like, again, it's sort of like every business, every organization I've dealt with, especially like membership organizations, everybody does everything completely different than the other one. Whereas like accounting, if you're doing an accounting system, debits always equal credits. So whether you're running a lemonade stand or a multi-billion-dollar corporation, at the end of the day, the accounting principles are kind of the same. But for a CRM system or a Power App, it could be widely different. So, I mean, that's just sort of one example. Definitely all the modules. I think anybody here that works in Dynamics 365 should probably come up off the top of their head a few different examples of how they've extended Dynamics 365. So, a good question. Anybody else? I guess it's lunchtime, so enjoy. Thank you very much for coming to my second day.